I guess I should start by saying that I never thought I'd be that guy, the one who gets blindsided by his wife's infidelity. My name is Jake, and I'm 35 years old. I used to think my life was going pretty well. I had a stable job as an IT manager, and my wife, Amanda, was a solid partner. We had been together for 8 years, married for 5. Sure, we had our ups and downs, but what couple doesn't, or so I thought. Everything changed one stormy afternoon. I remember it vividly. I had come home early from work. I was trying to surprise Amanda with a cozy dinner. But instead, I found her in our living room on the phone, giggling like a schoolgirl. I heard snippets of the conversation, flirty language that made my stomach churn. I stood there, hidden behind the wall, listening to her giggles, her tone shifting from sweet to sultry. My heart sank as she said, "I can't wait to feel you again," followed by a fit of laughter. It felt like a knife twisting in my gut. At that moment, I thought I was imagining things. I mean, who would? My wife. The woman I trusted with every part of my life was talking like that to someone else. I waited until she hung up, and then I confronted her. She gave me a look that I can only describe as a mix of annoyance and guilt. "What's your problem?" she snapped. I was just on the phone with my friend. But the way her eyes darted away from mine told me everything I needed to know. I pushed her harder, demanding to know the truth. The excuses flew out of her mouth like confetti at a parade. "Oh, come on, Jake. It was just a joke, you're overreacting." But as the words left her lips, I noticed the slight quiver in her voice. People can be great actors when they're desperate to hide the truth. As I looked into Amanda's eyes, a wave of emotions crashed over me. I felt anger, betrayal, and a deep sadness that I couldn't quite process at that moment. I loved her, yet here she was, lying straight to my face. Eventually, she stormed off to the bedroom, leaving me standing there, feeling like a fool. I could hear her muffled voice on her phone again, and I knew it wasn't with a friend. The next few days were a whirlwind. I tried to talk to her, but all I got were dismissive responses. "I don't want to talk about it," she would say, "or you're making a big deal out of nothing." It was infuriating. I decided to do some digging. I started checking her messages when she left her phone unattended, and that's when I found evidence: flirty texts, explicit conversations, and plans that confirmed my worst fears. It was like I was living in a nightmare, one that kept getting worse. Each text I read felt like a punch to the gut, and with each revelation, my anger grew. I realized I had to confront her again, but this time I wouldn't be looking for excuses. I needed the truth. One night after she had returned from a night out with friends, I knew the moment had come. I confronted her with the evidence, laying it all out on the table. "Who is he?" I demanded, trying to keep my voice steady. But deep down, I was ready to explode. I had spent years building a life with this woman, and here she was tearing it apart. The confrontation was explosive. Amanda's face lost all color as she realized I had proof. "Jake, please," she begged, her voice wavering. "It's not what you think." But we both knew it was precisely what I thought. I was furious, betrayed, heartbroken. The woman I thought I knew had shattered my world. The emotional impact hit me like a freight train. My mind raced, contemplating what I had done wrong. Was I not enough? Did I not cater to her needs? The questions were endless, and the answers were always the same. As I paced our living room, I felt a sense of clarity beginning to emerge through the haze of pain. I knew I couldn't let this go unpunished. I had to confront the reality of our relationship and decide what came next. I wanted revenge, but more than that, I needed to take control of my life. The anger simmered inside me, and I began plotting. This was not just about her betrayal. It was about reclaiming my dignity. I knew I had the upper hand now, and I was going to use it. I had seen the way she treated me, and it was time for a change. I was done being the nice guy. As I sat on the couch, the weight of my emotions crashing down like waves, I realized I had to act. I couldn't let her get away with this. I would burn her bridges just as she had burned my clothes, figuratively speaking, of course. I was going to make her feel the consequences of her actions. And just like that, I was determined to take back my life. Once that initial confrontation was over, I felt like a different person, a mix of raw anger and steely resolve. It was clear that I couldn't just sit back and let Amanda continue to manipulate the situation. I had to think strategically. Revenge isn't always about grand gestures. Sometimes, it's about the little, calculated moves that turn the tables in your favor. I decided to create a plan. First, I needed to gather more evidence. I started by paying close attention to Amanda's behavior. As much as it pained me, I had to become something of a detective. I observed her as she got ready to go out with friends, noting the extra effort she put into her appearance, the way she dressed, the new perfume she wore, and the way she seemed to rush out the door with an excitement I hadn't seen in a long time. I couldn't help but wonder if she was using the same energy for her friends that she used to reserve for me. One night I decided to follow her. It turned into a wild goose chase, but it was necessary. I waited until she left the house, and then I got into my car, heart racing. The sun was setting, and the streets were filled with the usual Friday night buzz. I kept my distance, trying to remain inconspicuous. I felt like a complete creep, but I needed to know where she was going. She drove to a bar downtown, the kind of place that was loud and packed with people. I parked a couple of blocks away and watched her enter. I felt a pang of jealousy and hurt as I saw her laughing and chatting with a group. Then my heart sank when I saw him. A tall guy with dark hair, leaning in too close, whispering something into her ear that made her laugh. Even harder, I felt like I had been punched in the gut. That was the guy. It wasn't long before they moved to a quieter corner, seemingly lost in their own world. My blood boiled, and I was torn between the urge to confront them and the practical side of me that told me to gather more information. I opted for the latter. I couldn't just blow my cover now, not when I was so close to getting the proof I needed. After a couple of hours, they finally left the bar and I followed them to a nearby hotel. My stomach knotted with every step I took. I parked at a distance and watched as they entered. It was infuriating and surreal. The woman I had loved was inside, cheating on me, and I felt powerless. But I reminded myself that this was all part of my plan. I needed to document everything, to have something tangible to present when I confronted her again. The next day, I went about my life as if nothing had happened. I focused on work, and when I got home, I acted like the dutiful husband. I even cooked dinner, putting on a smile. Even though all I could think about was the betrayal. It was hard, but I was determined to keep my cool. I wanted to give Amanda enough rope to hang herself. A few days passed after my little excursion, and I gathered more evidence during our conversations. She was getting sloppier with her lies, talking about friends too often, mentioning late nights that didn't add up. I felt a surge of confidence. I had the evidence I needed, and I was ready to expose the truth. One evening, I decided to set the stage for the next confrontation. I invited Amanda to sit down for a serious chat. My heart raced with anticipation, but I kept my expression neutral. "We need to talk," I said, trying to sound calm even though my insides were churning. "What is it, Jake? You look serious," she said, feigning concern, but I could see the flicker of apprehension in her eyes. This was it. I pulled out my phone and showed her the photos I had taken of her with her friend at the hotel. I watched her face transform from confusion to horror. "What the hell is this?" she stammered, her fingers trembling. "I think the bigger question is, who the hell is he?" I replied, my voice steady. I felt a rush of adrenaline as I watched her squirm. For a moment she seemed genuinely speechless. "Jake, please, it's not what it looks like," she exclaimed, desperation creeping into her voice, but I wasn't having it. I had seen enough and heard enough of her lies. I pressed on. "Don't lie to me, Amanda. I can't believe you're trying to wiggle out of this. I saw you. I have pictures, proof of your affair. You can't just sweep this under the rug." The tears started to well up in her eyes, and for a brief moment I almost felt sorry for her. Almost. "I was going to tell you, I just needed time," she cried, her voice cracking. I couldn't believe the audacity. Needed time for what? To see him more, to decide how to break my heart. I snapped, the anger boiling over. The betrayal stung more sharply than I had anticipated, and I fought to hold back the wave of sorrow that threatened to crash over me. In that moment, I saw a flicker of remorse cross her face, but then it vanished just as quickly. "You don't understand. We were having problems. I was lonely," she shot back, trying to justify her actions like it was an excuse that made sense. "Problems? So you decided to cheat on me? That's your solution? and then lie about it on top of everything. I could feel the rage coursing through my veins. You think that makes any sense? The confrontation escalated into a shouting match, filled with accusations and tears. Amanda tried to shift blame, saying I hadn't been attentive enough, that I had neglected her, but I didn't want to hear it. I was done with the lies and the excuses. After what felt like an eternity, we finally reached a breaking point. I had made my decision. I wasn't going to fight for a relationship that was already dead. I had to reclaim my life, and that meant getting rid of her. The truth is, Amanda, I can't be with someone who doesn't respect me, I said, my voice steady but cold. You've betrayed my trust in the worst way possible. I want a divorce. The words hung heavy in the air. I could see the realization hit her like a brick wall. She opened her mouth to argue, but it was too late. I was resolute. I was no longer the passive husband willing to accept her excuses. I was ready to take control and burn those bridges, just as she had burned my heart. I felt a rush of freedom as I walked away, knowing I was finally taking steps for myself. I wasn't just going to sit back and let this happen. I was ready to fight back and show her that this was not going to end in her favor. The game was just beginning, and I was ready. After the confrontation, a strange mixture of relief and anger swirled within me. The decision to end things with Amanda felt liberating, yet the emotional weight still hung over my head. I was now a man with a newfound purpose, but I had to tread carefully. I had every intention of making her feel the consequences of her actions, but I also wanted to do it in a way that didn't leave me looking like the bad guy. I had to be smart about my next moves. I began by consulting an attorney, a process I had put off during our marriage. I was determined to protect myself, both financially and emotionally. I met with a lawyer named Sarah, who was sharp and no-nonsense. She listened patiently as I recounted my story, detailing every humiliating moment and the evidence I had gathered. I could feel a sense of strength returning with each word I spoke. Sarah assured me that I had a solid case for divorce, especially given Amanda's infidelity. After our meeting, I felt a surge of empowerment. I was taking control of my life, and that was a significant step forward. I started to formulate a plan to ensure that Amanda wouldn't walk away unscathed. I knew I had to act fast before she could gather her own defenses or play the victim in front of family and friends. One evening, I made the decision to move out of the house. It felt strange packing my things, knowing I had shared this space with Amanda for so long. Each item I folded reminded me of our life together, the good times and the bad. But I was determined to not let nostalgia cloud my judgment. The moment I loaded the last box into my car, I felt a weight lift. I was no longer tied to her lies and betrayal. While I was moving into a small apartment downtown, I also started to gather my support system. I reached out to a couple of close friends, Mark and Lisa, who had always been there for me. Over a few beers one night, I shared everything: how I had discovered Amanda's affair, the confrontation, and my plans for moving forward. Their responses were supportive, and they offered to help in any way they could. It felt good to have people in my corner. As the days turned into weeks, I focused on getting my life back on track. Work became a welcome distraction, and I threw myself into my projects. I started hitting the gym again, and with every drop of sweat, I felt like I was shedding the remnants of my old life. I was determined not to let this situation define me. I wanted to emerge stronger and smarter. But Amanda wasn't going to take my departure lying down. The first sign of her desperation came when she texted me, begging for a second chance. I made a mistake, Jake. We can work through this, she wrote. I felt a rush of anger as I read her words. How could she be so deluded? I weighed my options before deciding to respond, but I kept it short and clear. It's too late. You made your choice. A few days later, I received a call from her. I was surprised to hear her voice, and even more so by the tone she took. It was a mix of pleading and anger. You can't do this to me. I loved you, and you just threw it all away. It was astonishing how she could still position herself as the victim. I reminded her of the reality of her actions, but I knew it was futile. That night, I shared the details of the call with Mark and Lisa over dinner. They were incredulous that Amanda still hadn't grasped the gravity of the situation. She's trying to manipulate you, dude, Mark said. You're doing the right thing by moving on. I appreciated their support, but a small part of me still struggled with feelings of guilt. I had loved Amanda once, and it hurt to think that we had ended up like this. As part of my revenge plan, I started documenting everything. I kept a journal of Amanda's actions, her attempts to contact me, her emotional manipulations, and every text or call I received. I knew I might need this information for the divorce proceedings. I wanted to ensure she couldn't twist the narrative in her favor. The day came when I filed for divorce, and I felt a mix of anxiety and relief. I had taken a significant step, and while I was nervous about what came next, I knew it was necessary. I had to be prepared for her reaction. I anticipated she would fight back, and I needed to stay one step ahead. About a week later, I received a call from my attorney. She informed me that Amanda had hired a lawyer and was planning to contest the divorce. She's going to try to make it as messy as possible, Sarah warned. I felt a surge of determination course through me. I wouldn't let Amanda manipulate this situation any longer. Her actions had consequences, and I was ready to face whatever came next. In the meantime, I continued to work on myself. I went out with friends more often, tried new hobbies, and even started dating again. It felt liberating to be out and about, rediscovering who I was outside the confines of my marriage. I knew I was healing, but the thought of Amanda's betrayal still lingered in the back of my mind. One evening, I went to a bar with Mark and Lisa. We were sitting at a table, sharing laughs and drinks, when I noticed a woman at the counter. She was stunning, with dark hair and a warm smile. I felt a flutter of attraction, an unfamiliar feeling that reminded me I could still connect with someone new. After a few moments' hesitation, I decided to approach her. "Hi, I'm Jake." I introduced myself, trying to keep things light. She turned, her eyes sparkling, and I felt a glimmer of hope. As we chatted, I began to realize that maybe I could find happiness again, something I thought was lost forever. As I walked back to my friends, I felt a renewed sense of purpose. I was moving forward, ready to embrace whatever came next. My marriage with Amanda was over, but my life was just beginning. The anger I had felt transformed into determination, and I was ready to see how far I could go from here. The plan for my revenge was still active, but now I was focused on building a better future for myself. Little did I know, the best was yet to come. As the weeks rolled on, I settled into my new life with a surprising sense of clarity. The divorce process was unfolding, and I was determined to navigate it with as much composure as possible. I had spent so much time feeling like the victim, but now I was ready to reclaim my narrative. I was taking charge, and as much as I wanted to burn bridges with Amanda, I also wanted to ensure I didn't become a bitter shell of my former self in the process. After filing for divorce, Amanda ramped up her attempts to manipulate me. She started sending me messages filled with emotional pleas, trying to elicit sympathy. "I'm so alone, Jake. Please don't do this," she would text, followed by "You can't just erase everything we had." It was maddening, and I had to remind myself of the cold hard truth. She had erased it herself. I decided to respond with silence, refusing to engage with her emotional games. I knew how she operated, and I wouldn't fall for it again. Each day that passed without responding felt like a small victory. I wasn't just avoiding her. I was taking control of my own emotions and refusing to be dragged back into her manipulative cycle. In the midst of all this, I found myself focusing more on my new friendships and adventures. I started going out more frequently, discovering new bars and restaurants. I even signed up for a cooking class, something I had always wanted to try but had never done while I was with Amanda. It felt good to fill my life with things that brought me joy. I was determined to move forward, leaving the pain of betrayal behind me. It was during one of these newfound social outings that I met Sarah, a woman who had recently moved to town. She was bright, funny, and had a contagious energy that reminded me of the excitement I had felt in the early days of my relationship with Amanda. We hit it off immediately, sharing stories and laughter over a few drinks. For the first time in months, I felt hopeful about the future. As our connection deepened, I began to realize that I was capable of opening my heart again. Sarah was different from Amanda. She actually listened and engaged in meaningful conversations, something I had craved for so long. I began to see the potential for a new relationship, one built on trust, respect, and genuine affection. It was exhilarating. However, Amanda wasn't done with me yet. One evening, I received a call from my attorney. She explained that Amanda was contesting the divorce settlement and claiming that I was hiding assets. "She's trying to paint you as the villain, Jake," Sarah said, her tone serious. "We need to gather all the evidence we can to counter her claims." My stomach dropped at the realization that Amanda was willing to drag this out, all in an attempt to hurt me. It was infuriating to think she would go to such lengths. I remembered how she had always been a whirlwind of drama, but this was a new low even for her. I knew that I had to be prepared for a fight. I worked closely with my attorney, providing all documentation I had, including our financial records and her unfaithful behavior. The emotional toll was heavier than I had anticipated. I found myself lying awake at night, replaying everything in my mind: our good times, the love we once shared, and the betrayal that had shattered it all. It was hard to come to terms with the fact that I had once trusted her completely. But I also knew I couldn't let her win or take away my newfound sense of self. As I moved forward with my legal battle, I leaned heavily on my support system. Mark and Lisa were as invested as I was, offering their assistance and joining me in social outings to keep my spirits high. They reminded me of the importance of surrounding myself with positivity and love. "You're not alone in this, buddy," Mark would say, clapping me on the back. "We've got your back." One evening, after a particularly draining day working on the divorce documents, I met Sarah for dinner. We ended up at a cozy Italian restaurant, and over delicious food and wine, I found myself opening up about everything: the betrayal, the divorce, and how I was trying to reclaim my life. Sarah listened intently, her empathy palpable. "You deserve happiness, Jake," she said softly. "You're stronger than you think. It's okay to take your time and heal." Her words resonated with me, and for the first time I felt truly seen and understood. We shared lively conversation, laughter, and a few stolen glances that ignited something within me. By the end of the night, I felt a mix of excitement and fear of diving into something new, but excitement for what could be. I walked her to her car, and as we said our goodbyes, she leaned in and kissed me. It was soft but electrifying, and I realized I was finally moving forward. The following weeks were a whirlwind. Sarah and I started dating more seriously, and I felt lighter than I had in a long time. I was still navigating the divorce process, and Amanda's tactics became increasingly desperate. She started showing up at places I frequented, trying to create scenes and draw attention to herself. I could see she was struggling with the realization that I had moved on, and it only fueled my resolve to keep pushing ahead. But I was done letting her dictate my emotions. I focused on my relationship with Sarah, which blossomed into something genuine and fulfilling. We shared a connection that reminded me how beautiful love could be when it wasn't marred by betrayal. I began to open up more, allowing myself to experience vulnerability again. One night, while Sarah and I were watching a movie at my apartment, I received a text from Amanda. "We need to talk, Jake. I can't keep doing this." A wave of irritation washed over me as I read her message. She had spent months trying to manipulate me, and now she wanted to talk. I took a deep breath, reminding myself that I was in control of my life now. I texted back, "I'm not interested in having that conversation. You made your choice." It felt good to stand my ground, and I could almost sense a shift within me, a feeling of empowerment I hadn't experienced in a long time. As the divorce proceedings continued, I remained focused on what mattered most: my new relationship and my path toward healing. I was no longer the man who was hurt and betrayed. I was becoming someone stronger, someone capable of love again. My journey was far from over, but I was finally ready to embrace the future without the shackles of my past hanging over me. Amanda's attempts to draw me back in were futile, and I was beginning to see her for who she really was: a woman unwilling to take responsibility for her actions. I had a long road ahead, but with each passing day, I became more resolved to burn those bridges behind me, once and for all. I was ready to close that chapter of my life and embrace the beauty of new beginnings. As the divorce proceedings dragged on, I found myself caught in a whirlwind of emotions. I had moments of clarity and strength, but there were still days when the weight of everything felt unbearable. I was determined to keep moving forward, though. I had Sarah by my side, and our relationship continued to blossom. She became my anchor, someone who reminded me of the joy that still existed in the world. The court dates were approaching, and I knew Amanda would pull out all the stops to try to manipulate the situation in her favor. I had been preparing for this moment, gathering evidence and reinforcing my resolve. My attorney, Sarah, was a powerhouse. She had fought hard for me and had built a strong case. I felt confident, but I also knew I had to stay grounded. In the weeks leading up to the court date, Amanda's behavior became increasingly erratic. She began reaching out to my friends, trying to paint herself as the victim. I received frantic messages from Mark and Lisa, who were caught off guard by her attempts. "She's trying to twist everything around," Mark told me during one of our calls. "Don't let her get to you." I had to remind myself that Amanda's actions were nothing more than desperate attempts to regain control. She was struggling to accept that I had moved on, and that was a reflection of her own insecurities. I refused to let her back into my life, and I grew stronger in my resolve to end things on my terms. The night before the court date, I sat down with Sarah and we went over the strategy. I had never been through anything like this before, so I was grateful for her guidance. "Remember, Jake, this is just a legal process. Keep your emotions in check and focus on the facts," she advised, her tone steady and reassuring. I nodded, absorbing her words. I was ready to present my case and make sure the judge understood the truth. Even though part of me felt nervous, I was determined to stand firm against Amanda's lies. When the day of the hearing arrived, I felt a whirlwind of emotions. I dressed carefully, choosing a suit that made me feel confident and strong. As I walked into the courthouse, I took a deep breath, reminding myself that today was about closure. This was my chance to finally move on from the past and fully embrace the future. As we entered the courtroom, I noticed Amanda sitting at the other table with her attorney. She wore a determined expression, but I could also see the flicker of anxiety in her eyes. I knew she was planning to put on a show, desperately trying to paint herself as the victim. But I was prepared for whatever she had up her sleeve. The hearing began, and as my attorney presented our case, I felt a sense of empowerment wash over me. Sarah laid out the details of Amanda's infidelity, her attempts to manipulate the situation, and the extensive evidence we had gathered. I sat there, listening intently, feeling validated as I heard the truth laid bare. Then it was Amanda's turn. She took the stand, and I braced myself for the spectacle. I watched as she spun her narrative, pleading with the judge. "I was unhappy. I thought Jake didn't care about me anymore," she exclaimed, her voice laced with emotion. It was almost theatrical, the way she tried to make herself seem like the victim in all this, but I was ready. My attorney cross-examined her, and I felt a sense of satisfaction as we dismantled her excuses piece by piece. "You were unfaithful, and you made those choices willingly," Sarah pointed out. "You can't claim to be a victim when you actively sought out another relationship." The tension in the courtroom was palpable, and I could see the anger rising in Amanda's expression. As the back and forth continued, I felt a renewed sense of purpose. I was not just defending myself, I was reclaiming my narrative, showing the reality of our marriage and her betrayal. After several hours, the judge called for a break, and I stepped outside for a breath of fresh air. I needed a moment to process everything. Mark and Lisa had shown up for support, and they were waiting for me with encouraging smiles. "You've got this, man," Mark said, clapping me on the back. "You're doing great." I felt a rush of gratitude, knowing I wasn't alone in this fight. I took a few deep breaths, mentally preparing for the next round. I would not let Amanda's theatrics derail my pursuit of justice. When we reconvened, the judge listened carefully to both sides, asking pointed questions. I could feel the weight of the moment, knowing that my future hinged on this decision. As the proceedings continued, I was struck by the realization that this was not just about the divorce. It was about my journey of healing and self-discovery. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, the judge delivered the ruling. I held my breath as he spoke, listening intently as he addressed Amanda's claims and the evidence presented. This court recognizes the infidelity and the attempts to manipulate the narrative. Jake has provided sufficient evidence to support his claims, he stated firmly. A rush of relief washed over me as the judge finalized the terms of the divorce. I was awarded a fair settlement, and Amanda's attempts to contest my assets were dismissed. It was the closure I had desperately sought. As we left the courtroom, I felt a mixture of relief and triumph coursing through me. I had faced my fears, confronted the betrayal head-on, and emerged victorious. I was finally free to move on and start anew. The journey wasn't over, though. Amanda tried to reach out to me one last time, sending me a text that read, "I'm sorry for everything. Can we at least be friends?" I stared at the message, my emotions swirling once more, but I quickly reminded myself of the pain she had caused. "No," I typed back, hitting send with a sense of finality. "We can't be friends." With that, I closed the door on Amanda and the past. As I walked away, I felt a profound sense of relief. I was ready to embrace my new life, to focus on the people who truly mattered. I had learned a lot about myself throughout this ordeal, about resilience, about the importance of self-respect, and about the power of moving forward. And as I stepped out into the sunlight, hand in hand with Sarah, I knew the best was yet to come. I was no longer defined by my past. I was the architect of my future, and nothing could hold me back. With the divorce finalized, I felt a newfound sense of freedom wash over me. I stepped into my new life with a sense of purpose, ready to embrace the possibilities ahead. The culmination of months of emotional turmoil had finally led to this moment, and while the scars of the past would always linger, I was done letting them define my future. The weeks following the court ruling were transformative. I focused on healing, both emotionally and mentally. I began spending more time with Mark and Lisa, who had been my rock throughout the entire ordeal. They helped me rediscover my passions and interests beyond the confines of my previous relationship. I attended local events, went hiking, and even tried my hand at painting, something I had always wanted to explore but never had the courage to do. Sarah and I continued to grow closer as well, our relationship blossomed into something genuine and loving. She had a way of making me feel valued and cherished, something I hadn't realized I had been missing. With her, I could finally let my guard down. We shared laughter, deeper conversations, and moments of vulnerability that further solidified our bond. I was learning to love again, and it felt incredible. One evening, we were sitting on my balcony, sipping wine and watching the sunset. It was a beautiful moment, and I couldn't help but reflect on how far I had come. "You know, I never thought I'd be here again," I admitted, looking into her warm eyes. "After everything with Amanda, I didn't think I could ever trust someone like this again." Sarah reached out, gently squeezing my hand. "You deserve to be happy, Jake. I'm just glad you're letting yourself feel again." Her words resonated deeply with me. I realized that the past had shaped who I was, but it didn't have to dictate my future. As the days turned into weeks, I also began to let go of the lingering resentment I held toward Amanda. While her betrayal had hurt me deeply, harboring anger was a weight I no longer wanted to carry. I started writing down my feelings in a journal, processing the pain and allowing myself to grieve the loss of what I had once thought was a happy marriage. One day, as I was writing, I decided to pen a letter to Amanda, not to send it, but to articulate my feelings. I wrote about my heartache, the betrayal, and ultimately, my decision to move on. It felt cathartic to express everything I had bottled up inside. By the time I finished, I felt lighter, as if a burden had been lifted from my shoulders. I never sent that letter, but it served a purpose. It was a final farewell to the relationship that no longer served me. My closure didn't depend on her acknowledgement. It came from within. I realized that forgiveness was not about excusing her behavior, but about freeing myself from the shackles of the past. As I continued to embrace this new chapter of my life, I found myself reflecting on what I had learned from the experience. I had learned the importance of self-respect, the value of clear communication, and the strength of vulnerability. I promised myself that moving forward, I would never ignore my instincts or allow someone to diminish my worth again. Eventually, I decided to take a trip, a getaway to a nearby coastal town where I could recharge and reflect on my journey. I booked a small cottage by the beach and spent my days exploring, writing, and enjoying the fresh air. The experience was rejuvenating, and for the first time in a long while, I felt a sense of peace. One evening, while watching the waves crash against the shore, I received a text from Amanda. "I've been thinking about everything. I want to apologize for how things ended between us." I stared at my phone, the familiar pang of anger and hurt rising up again. But instead of reacting impulsively, I took a deep breath and decided to respond with grace. "Thank you for your message. I appreciate your apology, but it's time for both of us to move forward separately." I hit send, feeling a sense of empowerment wash over me. I wasn't looking for reconciliation. I was choosing my own path. When I returned from my trip, I felt rejuvenated and ready to embrace my life fully. The shadows of my past no longer loomed over me. Instead, they had become lessons that shaped who I was becoming. I had learned to love myself first, and that was the foundation for any future relationship I would pursue. As I continued to date Sarah, our connection deepened. We were building a relationship based on mutual respect, understanding, and genuine affection. I could see a future with her, one filled with joy and adventure. Looking back, I knew the betrayal had been a painful chapter in my life, but it had also ignited a fire within me. I had unearthed a strength I didn't know I possessed, and for that I was grateful. I had burned the bridges of my past, and now I was ready to construct new ones, stronger and built on trust. Life continued to unfold, and I was excited about what lay ahead. I had turned my pain into purpose, and as I navigated this journey of healing, I knew that the best was yet to come. I was ready to embrace love again, not just with someone else, but with myself. And that was the most important lesson of all.